So this is 21:20 hours GMT on Thursday, the 20th of August 2020. This edition is about the widespread absence that I notice from the Muslim communities that I have seen and observed of anything like the Abu Huraira-like love of cats. Now that's the beginning. I can extend that statement by saying that among the Muslims that I have seen and observed and lived among and side by side with, there is a corresponding similar absence of active concern for the environment, active concern for the future of the young people and the children and their behavior, their character. So we start with the cats. The name Abu Huraira, Abu is the Arabic for father, and Huraira is translated into two different words, either kittens or cats. Whichever or both refer to the same thing, cats. And Abu Huraira was given that name by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because of his love of cats, and he was always carrying a cat, or he was around a cat wherever he went. And that is something to say about the reason for the companion of the Prophet, peace be on him, being so remarkably associated with and identified as one with such devotion and love for cats. Because the Prophet is the example or exemplar of everything that a Muslim is supposed to be following. And he is the definitive example of the ideal Muslim. That is the saying, that is the narrative. So how is it that nearly 1,400 plus years later, the Muslims who in that time have been involved in some otherwise, quote, successful invasions, achievements of wars and occupations of other people's countries, and yet they have not established anything like a reliable narrative about loving cats, let alone looking after cats in a social setting, upholding their rights and needs. And there is not a culture of welfare of animals among Muslims in any way that can be remotely compared to the corresponding culture that exists among the, quote, non-Muslims and people of other faiths. So how is that possible? My explanation is that it is not an accident. The curriculum, the education programs followed by what is called the madrasas in the subcontinent and their equivalent in other parts of the world are based on an incomplete understanding of Islam, based on an incomplete adherence to Islam. So therefore, most of the things to do with the environment, to do with the needs and welfare needs needs and safety of the animals are left out. And it is not my word, it is the actual behavior and the conduct of the people who have been schooled, trained through those madrasas. And it is not helped that the legacies left by the disciples of Macaulay in the so-called secular education system that Macaulay's disciples imposed, in those institutions which still are the predominant sources of administrative personnel in the countries, say in the subcontinent, because it's so huge. The subcontinent has got what we'd say, 1,500 million plus people. So it's a huge place, 1.5 billion people in the subcontinent. So huge place, huge field to investigate extensively every aspect of life. And all the universities, models still under the British Raj model, are totally devoid of the idea of independence in education. The independence being that the resources in the countries, the resources in the surrounding communities meaning the neighborhoods of the university or the college located, where the college and the universities are located, and also the people who come from various other parts of the given country to study in those institutions. The entire focus is based on an absolutely unforgivable and illogical, impractical, unscientific, and unfit for purpose understanding of education and the degree and all the rest of it. The result is that right across the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the abuse of the environment is absolutely allowed without any question. And the same thing applies to the neglectful attitude to animals and the cruelty inflicted on the animals. I'm not going to describe any of the cruelty, but the fact is that it is given that animals, the word animal, the swear word animal, is itself evidence of the contempt and the disrespect and the defiance of the rights of and the welfare of the animal that people actually harbor and possess and carry in their minds. And that is part of the schooling, the brainwashing, and the miseducation that takes place both under the banners of Islamic schools and the secular schools, so-called, or modern schools or modern institutions. So there is a kind of correlation between the two systems. They complement each other in their failures, their unfitness, and their inculcation of not enlightenment, but inculcation of darkness, cruelty, lack of regard and respect, which is why all these people who get schooled in those institutions or through those institutions and then end up after various competitions or whatever, or nepotism, end up as being appointed full-time employees or engaged in professions, the likes, including the profession of medicine, the profession of quote law, and other disciplines, so-called, they end up failing their duties to nature, to the environment, to the other humans. And the result is that there is no democracy because there is no outcry about the breaches that are the given of the norms of universal values universal values of compassion to animals, respect to animals, and respect to other human beings, and compassion and respect to the environment. So when people say they are independent of the colonialist power, like in the case of the subcontinent, it's the UK or the British, they suggest that lack of independence for 190 years prevented them from being good people in the discussions that I have had so far in brief in this outline and in this introduction. But when they are free from the shackles of colonialism, they don't exhibit evidence of freedom by being compassionate, kind, tolerant, enlightened human beings in their education, in their administration, in their behavior as in power, in government positions across the country, local level, regional level, central level. And the same case with the operation of the mainstream media. They are absolutely artificial, and they're still imitating and aping the narrative, the models, the images, the imageries of the former so-called colonialist powers. So in the media, take the case of India, because India has got numerically the largest number of publications in English and channels in English, and they are carrying any kind of rubbish that is manufactured and posted and published. Of course, it is absolutely instantaneous because of the internet. In America, in the USA, in Canada, in UK, Germany, France. A big chunk is from Russia as well, and other smaller sized Western European countries. Only a token bit is from China and Japan and South Korea. But essentially, the subcontinent, while it is absolutely alert to fight one another, for example, Pakistan and India, they are totally lazy and laid back when their whole cultural institutions or cultural kind of architecture is taken over by the narrative and the agenda and the language of the colonialist and the alien. And so, therefore, the independent subcontinent, independent now for 73 years, is still dependent and getting more dependent culturally and an inhumane attitude towards the animals, towards the environment, and towards the other human beings. So, in my comment on the 14th of August, I referred to the treatment by the Pakistani army of a group of Baluchi students protesting against lack of resources and so on. And I warned Imran Khan or whoever takes his position that if they don't respect the children making legitimate demands justifiable on universal standards, then they will be the ones to be held responsible for the damage done to the whole country. That is a sample. And the same applies 1,000 times across India. The Indian government, Indian local forces, the local authorities are brutal, cruel, intolerant of dissent and debate. And so I'm saying that it's not just the Muslims, the whole lot, whatever the religion, are actually suffering from lack of universality of values in their behavior, in their agendas, in their narratives, in their curriculums, and in their government machineries. So, this is the introductory diagnosis in a short summary, and it will be continued in due course. And I will be moving next in this edition to the connecting of all these shortcomings, unfitness, and cruelties, and lack of compassion to the preponderance, the overwhelming preponderance of lack of basic needs by the neighbors. Be the Brahmins, the Brahminists, or be they Muslims or whatever sect or faction or whatever grouping, the overwhelming experience of people in poverty in Pakistan and in Bangladesh and India is that they are better off or well off neighbors don't care about them. Now, translate that to the animals. The cats are supposed to be so beloved by the Prophet. And the Prophet is supposed to be the ideal human being for Muslims. And they abuse cats, they massacre cats, they murder cats, and they are cruel to cats many, many, many times every single day. There is no law and there is no ethics, there is no morality in place. And so this is a poverty of the soul. And the poverty of the soul of the people in the Muslim community directly produces poverty of the body. And the poverty is widespread in Bangladesh and in Pakistan. Poverty is wider spread than it should be at all. As I said in an earlier edition, when the election campaign in 1970 was being kind of aimed at the election date months before the election, one of the slogans, one of the leading slogans that is so memorable that the Awami League in East Pakistan then carried was Bishtaka Mondore Chal Chai. They wanted rice at the rate of 20 rupees or 20 taka. That was at the time in 1970. The rate in West Pakistan or similar amount in West Pakistan. And the idea during the election campaign, the Awami League propounded was that the West Pakistani controlled government was discriminating against the East Pakistanis. And it was evident in the what is called disparity in prices, in income, and everything else. In that campaign in 1970, there was no concern about the cruelty being done to cats and animals, the cruelty being done to the environment, the cruelty being done to other human beings. It was a very big block slogan. And the same thing is being repeated in India and in today's Pakistan. Big blocks of human beings being kind of targeted for vilification, collective demonization, but always by leaving out even the existence of animals, the existence of the environment, and a lot of damage being done to the environment across the subcontinent. And that environment, in my view, includes very much the most important source of so much environmental stability and resource, which is the abode of ice, the Himalayas, and of which Everest is one part only. But the whole range across the region from the northeast of India to the northwest of Pakistan. That is the source of so much resource stability, and the negligence by the Indian and Pakistani governments, and the Nepalese, of course, under lures of the distorting, corrupting lures of the Western adventurers. A lot of damage is being done to the environment, and there is no kind of evidence, there is no sign of it being stopped, let alone reversed. And so the hunger and the poverty that the refugees, including the Sudanese 16-year-old who died 2 days ago in France, those hungers and the driving forces of the poverty and destitution will drive people from those countries, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, out to the rest of the world, because the subcontinent itself will collapse in terms of various parts of its environment. It will collapse. And in the case of Bangladesh, there is a persistent or consistent series of predictions that there will be serious upheaval, geological upheaval in the in the in the in the area that is now Bangladesh, rendering millions of people homeless, jobless, and millions of people are likely to lose their lives. So there is no evidence in the behavior of the political so-called policymakers or spewers that they are bothered about these possibilities. And this is connected with the cruelty to animals and the culture of cruelty and intolerance and the mass murders and massacres and abuse of animals. Now, to devout Muslims, there are large numbers of Muslims in India, but there are in terms of proportion of people, in Bangladesh, there are more people who are Muslims, and the same case in Pakistan. Then there are, in relative terms, or in terms of the whole population, there are in India. But nevertheless, the fact is that the Muslims are defying one of the most important values left behind by the Prophet, peace be on him, by massacring, abusing cats and abusing other animals, mistreating other animals. And there is no sign that any outfit or organization which claims to be speaking for Islam or Muslims is bothered about that violation. Not only are the so-called secular parties unbothered about it and are actually perpetrating the same abuses as the members of the ordinary public, but the so-called Islamic, devout Islamic parties or movements or agencies or organizations are also not bothered about the fact that widespread abuse of cats and other animals continues to take place in Bangladesh. And the same is absolutely true in the case of Pakistan. And this is unacceptable on a strictly universal objective interpretation and understanding of the teachings of the Prophet and the teachings of Islam. So that is absolutely something that must be addressed and must be reversed, and the provisions made immediately for the inculcation of Islamic teachings for the respect and welfare and protection of animals, beginning with the protection and respect and preservation and the provision of proper health facilities for the cats and other animals. And I think that that is a beginning, and we shall be coming back to this topic in due course every time there is a reason for it. And I'm speaking at a time when there is a reason which will become very clear in the other parts, especially the reason being the destruction of the cat's house in Brick Lane. The destruction of the cat's house in Brick Lane that was plotted months before the destruction was carried out by a group of criminals hired by or contracted by a number of, quote, Muslims in Brick Lane area. And we shall be coming back to detailing what they did in July, August, and September 2012. And we shall be focusing attention on the criminality that is allowed by the local Tower Hamlets Council and the criminality on each occasion that was allowed by Tower Hamlets Council while Lutfur Rahman was in post as the mayor. Remember, Lutfur Rahman still remains the description. He is the badge, he is the label that he was a Muslim mayor. Not only did he not show any Islamic flavor in his administration, but he openly colluded with criminals and cabals of criminals that actually destroyed the house that belonged to the cats in Brick Lane. And I filmed Lutfur Rahman near that address on Tuesday, the 15th of February 2011. And that short clip of him being filmed near that address is still online. And I told Lutfur Rahman before I filmed him that he should be paying attention to what I had to say about the Tower Hamlets Council doing dreadful things, illegal things, bad things. And the bad things turned out to include the destruction of the cat's house and the robbery of the huge, exclusive, world exclusive archives of action files that had been kept in the cat's house for reasons that we shall be detailing and elaborating on in later parts. And that is where the actual claim of comparison between the cost, the value, the material value, the replacement value becomes relevant. The comparison I have made with the combined known published wealth of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk and others of contemporary world, all their known wealth combined on one side would not begin to match the value of what has been stolen and removed and hidden from the cat's house in Brick Lane by the criminals, consisting of a number of, quote, Muslims. And we shall be using the evidence as part of the program of campaigning to educate and liberate and enlighten, which is what the Khoodeelaar television is about. One of the culprits, one of the perpetrating criminals colluding with those criminal Muslims was another Muslim criminal doing the trade as a solicitor. So the behavior of that soul cheater is the reason why I call them soul cheaters. One person running a so-called solicitor business. I instructed that soul cheater, criminal liar, to do a very basic letter of warning to those criminals in order to stop them doing the damage that they were evidently plotting to do. And that criminal, crook, soul cheater, absolutely failed to understand my Siloti language instruction to him. I gave him that instruction repeatedly over 5 or 6 different conversations. And that criminal failed. And the criminal failed as part of a conspiracy of unbelieving, corruption, and misunderstanding and defiance against the need to preserve the sanctity and the exclusive work and the manuscripts and the files and the safety of the cats in the cat's house in Brick Lane during the months of July, August, and September 2012. This is not the full contents of the account, but this is a summary, updated view. And this is so important that it affects not only the ordinary small numbers of people who make up the so-called diaspora based on Bangladeshi origin people. It affects the entirety of the thinking Muslims on the planet Earth today, because the work that the criminals, Muslim criminals, destroyed or had destroyed and hidden and stolen and removed by the racist gang of 4 or 5 affects the work of all the scholars and thinkers and all the schools in all the institutions either set up or run or peopled by Muslims. And it all goes back to the origins of the teachings of Islam, and it comes back to this current century or the last century contemporary world to create a new narrative, universal narrative, liberating humankind based on the universal values. Now, how many channels or how many outlets that anyone viewing this has come across as being produced either from the UK or the USA or from India or Bangladesh or Pakistan that has addressed these issues in these ways. So therefore, this is in itself evidence that we are dealing with some very important, unique, exclusive issues and challenges and duties, because we have the duty to share with the rest of humanity the best of the ideas, the best of the values that liberates all of humanity. And that liberation cannot begin to take place, cannot begin to be conceived of without recognizing and respecting cats, other animals and creatures, the environment, and the future of the planet. So, not only are we ahead of everything that the environmentalists are now saying, when I say we, the campaign that I am part of and advocating on behalf of and representing, we have been ahead of what is now known as the Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg and the other followers that she has inspired, or David Attenborough. So all the contents, all the evidence, factual evidence that I have collected and I have curated and I have created over decades and had to keep in the cat's house in Brick Lane has been affected by these gangs of criminals, Muslim criminals hiring non-Muslim criminals. And they have deprived the whole of humanity today of the unique work that not only matches the combined contents in terms of the impact and the message that is represented by the British Library, the Library of Congress, and the other corresponding libraries across the world, but exceeds, excels, and supersedes the appeal and the attractiveness, the uniqueness of all of those. So this is coming to 6 minutes to 10 in the evening, GMT, that is on Thursday, the 20th of August 2020. So the next edition we shall be updating again on the likely opportunistic move that Robert Jendrick may be maneuvered to have to make about the mass evictions that will then take place if he doesn't do the about turn and if he doesn't extend the moratorium, that is suspension of court actions against tenants of private properties. So until then, this is 5 minutes to 10 in the evening.